Hey guys, Cliff Gray here with Flat Tops Wilderness Guides to True Hunts. Today I'm doing another glassing strategy video, and it's going to piggyback my other glassing videos, so go check them out. Today I'm going to focus on some strategy, kind of how I choose where I'm going to glass from, what terrain I glass, when I glass certain spots, for certain species, the area that I glass, all of those kind of nitty-gritty details. I got a lot of questions on that, and I'll just forewarn you, a lot of the answers are kind of it depends, but I'll go over that throughout the video. So just right off the bat, so for all you impatient guys, I'm going to spend 45 seconds here to give you 80% of the solution to glassing, okay? The first thing is go as high as you can, okay? What you'll see is that the higher you go, the more the terrain opens up. Even if the grain of the terrain is not exactly at the right angle, if you go higher, you're going to see more of the terrain. If you've got the right angle on terrain with the grain of the land, higher, again, you're going to be able to see more country, all right? So always climb higher if possible and find a good spot. I would say that's the number one thing. That's 80% of glassing, is glassing from the right location, all right? A lot of people are kind of amazed at guides' ability to find game. And again, 80-90% of that is that guides that know the country, they know where to glass from, okay? So there's not like some crazy secret sauce that these guys have. What it is, they know where to glass from and when certain glassing points are hot, all right? So that right there is 80% of it. And then to kind of tag on along that, I kind of already mentioned it in there, is try to get where you're glassing with the grain of the topography. So I'll give you guys a close-up, but basically that means when you're looking at terrain, if all your chutes are going to your left, from high right to lower left, that means you're off of the terrain, you're not with the grain. If the basins and the drainages are open to you, then you're glassing with the grain of the land, all right? So that's the second big one, all right? So those two things, get the grain of the topography correct, and then get as high as you can. Even as an experienced guide, sometimes you'll hike into somewhere, you'll have looked at it on Google Earth or Topo Maps or whatever, and you'll think that's a great glassing spot. You'll hike in there in the dark and you start glass from there, and you realize it's not quite right. You can't see what you expected to see from there, or the grain of the land is not open to you or whatever. My advice is just move, bite the bullet and move. Pick your shit up and go to the spot, the next spot that makes sense. A lot of times you'll go to a spot and it won't be quite right, and you'll look over on the next ridge and you'll be like, if I was there, I could see a lot of game. Don't just hold out and do that another day. Do it right then. Go up to that spot and actually glass from where you can see country. The main thing about glassing is you got to see the right country in order to actually glass up animals. So don't second guess that, all right? All right, guys, so I'm going to show you via my phone scope what I mean by the grain of the land, all right? So here, when I'm looking at these drainages, you can see these ridge lines are going off to my left. There, you can see these, all the terrain is kind of going off to my left, all right? See these little bellies in here, this little topography, it's all going there. So I'm looking kind of perpendicular across the grain of the topography, okay? That's not ideal, all right? If you have to glass that way, you might have to do it. It just depends on, where you're at. You may not be able to change location for whatever reason to get a straight look at this. If you have to glass terrain like this, that's got those little ridges in there, they're running perpendicular to you, watch those as if they're skylines. Each one of those is a little skyline. There's one there in the middle of my screen. I kind of would view, right there against the aspens is another one. There are three right there. 1, 2, 3, okay? View those each as little skylines and watch them like a hawk. If I have to glass country like this where I'm across the grain, what I'm doing is I'm watching those a lot, and I tend to be glassing pretty fast, because a lot of times what I'll do is I'll see game when it moves onto the next ridge, all right? So to comment on what it looks like whenever you're looking at terrain from the proper angle, it's going to look like this, okay? So you can see here on the right side of this basin, I can see everything down in there through all the bottoms opened up, and go across the belly of the drainage, come up on the other side, okay? So this terrain in here, I can see pretty well. I would say that my angle's perfect for that chute, okay? All right. And then up here higher, like in that little hole there, my angle is perfect. So if I want to glass these chutes here, my angle is perfect. I don't need to adjust. The only thing that's going to help me, as I mentioned, is if I get up higher, I'm going to be able to see even more terrain in these chutes, even if the grain of the land is perfect to me. So just to review, right here is good. This basin's open. You can see it's open to me, right? When I go back over here, see these? There's a lot of hidden topography in here. I can't see down in those chutes. So to really get a good look at those chutes, I either need to get way higher, or I need to move way to my left where they open up and I'm looking down in them, and I'm looking into the grain of that topography. All right, so here's an example of 3 things: glassing edges, having the terrain correctly open to you, and the nature of animals and how they bed. So it's cold right now, very cold, January, so you can see these muley does are actually bedded in open oak brush, basically. You're not going to see this during hunting season unless it's a late, like a rut hunt. You'll see deer bed like this. But you can see that they're right on the edge of some terrain there, and then they've got a lot of good browse down below them. The key thing, though, is look where they're bedded in that basin right now. And this is pretty common for mule deer. Here's one side of the basin. Here's the other side over here, all right? If I didn't have an open view at this, like a straight on with, looking right up the grain of the topography, I probably wouldn't see those deer. And that's very common. If they're in an aspen draw or whatever, a lot of times they'll be down low where they have some cover. So even in times where they're going to bed in colder terrain, let's call it, they're still going to be in that chunk of the topography. So you've got to watch for that stuff, and that's a good example of showing you how glassing with the grain of the land makes a big difference. I get a lot of questions about, well, do you glass into the sun? Do you always glass with the sun at your back? All these sort of questions. And the answer to this is usually it depends, all right? Okay, obviously, right now I have the sun in front of me. You can see that. And that makes it so this country in front of me is actually harder to glass, right? Because the sun is going at me. I have to deal with that going into the lens. But the other thing is all the country just isn't opened up by the sunlight, so it's darker. And when country's darker, particularly if it's got cover in it, it's a lot harder to see game, all right? If I was on that ridge looking back here and I had the sun at my back, all this country is going to be very open. All those shadows are going to be minimized. There's going to be very little area where it's hard to see game, all right? So the flip side of that is you have to deal with animal behavior, all right? So right now it's January and it's fairly cold. So deer and elk during this period of time, if I was over there glassing into this, particularly in prime, feeding hours, close to morning and close to night, I'm going to typically glass with the sun at my back when it's really cold and I know the hides of the animals can tolerate that heat. A lot of times you'll find them on this south-facing stuff that's open and it's easier to glass. Now earlier in the year, in most of the hunting season for mule deer and elk, the reality is you're going to have to do some of your glassing with the sun in your face because they're going to spend a lot of their time on those kind of more north-facing slopes, thicker stuff, areas where they're not getting the sun on them. Generally, game during hunting season, particularly before November, it doesn't want to spend a lot of time in the sun, all right? Okay, so you can kind of gauge that. Like I said, it just depends. The warmer it is, relative to what the animal's hide cover is at that that period of time, the more likely they're going to be in the dark or the shade, or they're going to be on the south facing slopes. So for instance, when it's really cold, a lot of times when I'm glassing into, into these south facing slopes, when it's, late November, late mule deer hunt, those deer actually right at feeding time, they'll come out in the sun. It's almost like they want to get warmed up, and they're usually going to come out into some vegetation that I know is high quality mule deer forage or browse or whatever. So that's a lot of times I'll actually specifically be looking into a south facing slope that's going to open up first. On the flip side of that, let's say we're hunting bighorn sheep. A lot of times, that's in early September and they don't want to be in the hot sun very long. So if it's a bright, hot sunny day that day, what I'll watch for is I'll actually be watching that sun line go across the topography. And a lot of times when the sun hits sheep that are in the shade and it brightens them up and the sun hits them, and they're already starting to build up kind of their winter hide, getting ready for late fall and winter. When that sun hits them, if they're bedded, they'll get up and move, and a lot of times I'll catch them. So I'll actually glass that line, that shade line, as it opens up, and as they get sun hit on them, they're actually going to move into the darker cover. Okay, and a lot of other species are like that too, but those are just examples. All right, so one question I get is, what kind of country do you glass? And that's almost impossible to answer, okay? Even within one species like mule deer, it's just gonna depend on what they're doing, what time of the year it is, all right? If I'm glassing a lot of aspen country, like in the rut hunts, so a lot of times what I'll do during that period of time is I'll glass these edges. Where the aspens meet the open country, I'll watch for deer running does along that country. So right here you can see that edge. Back in here you can see that big aspen stringer runs along there. In there I'll just watch that like a hawk and glass that. A lot of times you're going to see bucks running does right along that country. The other thing I'll do is, particularly once I know an area, is I'll look in these kind of little drainages, and I'll see, I'll pick a doe up or something walking along there, and you'll figure out where their trails are through the top of these basins, and I'll watch those areas. Like right in here, you can see some old snowed in tracks there, go through there. I know for a fact, just from glassing this country a lot, that there's a trail that runs through there. So I'll watch those areas in particular. But generally my focus is on edge terrain. So right in here you can kind of see one of those areas where deer have been moving through. Right above some pretty good browse. And here you can see deer right there. Working a little bit of that oak brush. So those are the type of areas I'll focus on, is find that feed source and then meticulously look at the edges around those good feed sources. The other thing I'll focus on a lot is I'll focus on vegetation that I know is something that the deer like during that time of year. So for instance, this stuff in here, this is a sagebrush flat right here, and it's got a bunch of mahogany in it, okay? You can see that those little mahogany bushes in there. I know that that's mahogany because I've been in there a lot, and I know it's also heavily browsed mahogany. And so I'll watch that a lot, and then in other areas that I don't know the terrain, I'll pick up that type of vegetation and I'll watch it, because that's where deer are going to be when they're hungry. Obviously, they're going to eat vegetation that they prefer. And here, a lot of that mahogany is like heavily browsed, so I'll look at that really heavily. And that just takes time. It takes a lot of practice to kind of learn the vegetation that you're more likely to see deer in. All right, guys, so I'm going to leave you with one strategy tip that I use a lot in my guiding, and this is for deer and elk in particular. And this is for once they've bedded down, okay? So, an hour and a half into light or whatever, when I'm much less likely to see them up and about moving around. I spent a lot of time looking in these aspen flats, and I mean like meticulous, all right? A lot of times, even with a spotting scope, all glass and aspen bottom, you know, from 200-300 yards away. So my field of view is tiny, but I'm slowly going through the terrain. And like this is a perfect example of this country here. I would look in that bottom just meticulously for deer bedded down or elk bedded down. A lot of times they'll bed down in the aspen right against topography, where they kind of have protection from stuff behind them, but also the wind swirls in that topography. But I'll just meticulously glass those aspen bottoms.
All right, so here's an example of short range glassing. This big glass, I'm just meticulously going through this bottom. And then here I see a little color and a little movement. I can lock in on that. Focus my scope a little bit. And there's a cow elk right there. If you are being super meticulous about that, slow grind through the bottom, you're not going to glass up animals like this. So that's a good example of short range glassing with big glass. That's typically how you're going to see animals. Just a little bit of movement. And here you've got an elk that's bedded, but we've still found her.
And a lot of times all I'm going to pick up is just the flicker of an ear, you know, buck turns his head, that sort of thing. I kill a lot of deer like that, and elk. And so the thing you have to keep in mind is that you're using really big optics to glass, you know, in fairly close terrain. I do that a lot, and you're seeing the details. Don't convince yourself that just because you don't see something, it's not there. I've literally glassed with a pair of 15s, and I kind of prefer 15s for this because it's such meticulous glassing. It's just going through stick by stick. A lot of times a buck will lay right against two downfalled aspens or something. So I'm going through stick by stick, and it's hard to do that in a spotter. Just there's more strain because obviously you're only using one eye. So 15s are nice for doing that, and I'll go really, really slow. I mean, I've glassed aspen bottoms for 30 minutes, all within 400 or 500 yards of me, and then I've had a moose stand up in the middle of it. Game can hide in those little chunks of topography, so you have to meticulously go through that. I do a lot of that at my guiding, kill a lot of deer in the middle of the day, bulls in the middle of the day, and it's because I glass them up in those aspen flats where even if they're bedded, we can kill them. So don't discount that. All right, guys, one last little practical tip. When you're setting up your tripod, when you're glassing, always use the thickest part of your tripod first, okay? So like in this case, I wouldn't do this. I wouldn't have this tight and then have my thinner leg out, okay? Thinner leg. See, I'm using thicker legs here. I'm always going to extend the thickest part of my tripod first, and then if I need it, add on my smaller ones, okay? That little tip will actually make your tripod significantly stouter, particularly if it's a less expensive tripod or kind of like an ultralight tripod. You'll find that if you're always using the thicker part of your tripod, you'll be a lot happier with the stability. All right. So anyways, guys, I hope those tricks helped you out a little bit. And I'll do a couple more glassing videos. I know everybody likes them, so I'll work on that, and I'll give you some more details on individual species and strategy. All right, guys, good luck.